Hi, it's John Vu, and this lesson is on Algo Latino from Trinity College London, drum kit grade 4. So looking at the sheet music in the book, you've got the song title at the top of the page, and then beneath that, to the left-hand side, the performance marking says Latin. So that's the style or genre of the piece, so we know we're playing a Latin piece. And then beside that, it says a quarter note equals 125, so that's the tempo of the piece. So this piece is going to be played at 125 quarter note beats per minute, which is I'd say a medium tempo for this style of music. And then beneath that, you can see the first bar of music there, and at the start of the bar we've got the percussion clef, and then beside that we've got the time signature, which is 4/4. So we've got a 4 at the top, which tells us there's 4 beats in the bar, and the 4 at the bottom tells us the note value of a beat is a quarter note. So we've got 4 quarter note beats in the bar. Right, now for this piece we're going to be playing Latin grooves, and we're also going to be playing rudimental fills. Okay, so we're going to look at the first 2 bars initially. So in those first 2 bars, we've got a rhythm of 8th notes on the first 2 beats in bar 1. So that'd be 1 and 2 and. Then we've got a quarter note on the 3 and 8th notes on the 4. So that'd be 3, 4 and. And then in the next bar, bar 2, we've got 8th notes on the 1 and a quarter note on the 2. So that'd be 1 and 2. And then we've got a half note rest for beats 3 and 4. So the rhythm of those first 2 bars is 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and 1 and 2, rest, rest. Okay, now for that 2 bar rhythm, we're playing a rudiment, and the rudiment we're going to be playing is a flamacue. Okay, so we've got 2 flamacues back to back there. We've got a right lead flamacue and a left lead flamacue. Okay, so a flamacue is a right flam, left stroke, right flam. And then the left lead flamacue, left flam, right stroke, left flam. Okay, so we're going to be playing this mainly on the snare drum, and normally that second note of the flamacue is accented, but what we're going to do is we're going to play that second note on the ride cymbal. Okay, so we're going to start with a right flam on the snare. So remember, with a right flam, left plays the grace note that drops in just before the primary note. Okay, so that right flam on the snare is followed by a left stroke on the ride cymbal. Okay, now obviously the ride cymbal is on the right side of the kit, so if you come across here, it's a little bit awkward. You can do that, you can play that left stroke on the ride over here, but if you've got a second ride, which I'm lucky enough to have, I've got it set up here on the left side of the kit. Okay, so I'm going to play my second ride here with the left hand, okay, on the left side of the kit. But you can also use your crash cymbal, okay? So if you haven't got a second ride cymbal and you've got a crash cymbal set up here, you can play your crash just like you'd play a ride cymbal. So as long as you don't play it on the edge of the cymbal and have that like explosive crash sound, and instead you play it with the tip of the stick on the face of the cymbal, get a nice pingy ride type sound, then that's okay as well, okay? So you've got some options. You can go across with the left hand to play the ride here. You can come up to play your second ride cymbal on the left side of the kit, or you can come up to play your crash cymbal on the left side of the kit, as long as you play it like you would do a ride, okay? So for this Latin piece, we want to play quite gentle as well, okay? We aren't hitting big, loud, like rocky notes. We're playing kind of subtle Latin type strokes, okay? So on those cymbals, just make sure face of the cymbal with the tip of the stick, okay? Also, on the ride cymbals, I've got these chains here, which mimics the sound of a rivet cymbal, okay? So you can use rivet cymbals in this piece, and again, it's not compulsory, it's optional, okay? So you can use standard ride cymbals. If you've got a rivet cymbal, you can use it, okay? And if you haven't, you can use these chains, which is a great way to mimic the sound of a rivet cymbal, okay? So you get that nice sizzling sound without having the actual rivets in the cymbal, okay? So you don't have to get a specific cymbal for a rivet sound. You can use standard ride cymbal and just put this chain on, which is removable, so you can put it on when you want that rivet sound, and you can take it off when you don't, okay? So that's what I've got here on my 2 ride cymbals, okay? Again, just to reiterate, that's optional. So we've got our right flam for the flamacue, left stroke on the left-sided ride cymbal, and you're going to play that in unison with the bass drum. And then we're going to come back down to the snare to play a right stroke, a left stroke, and a right flam. So that's your right lead flamacue, which is 1 and 2 and 3. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and then we're straight into the left lead flamacue, where we got left flam on the snare drum, and then we've got a right stroke on the ride cymbal. Okay, now because I'm playing that with the right hand, I'm going to play my ride cymbal on the right side of the kit, okay, in unison with the bass drum. Back to snare for left stroke, right stroke, and then the left flam. So that's the left lead flamacue, starting on the 4th beat of the first bar, spilling into the next bar. And also with the left lead flamacue, we add a bass drum in at the end of the rudiment. So when we play that left hand flam at the end of the left flamacue, we're going to play that in unison with a bass drum. Okay, so that left lead flamacue sounds like this. Remember, we come in on the 4. We've got 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that's 4 and 1 and 2, and then obviously we rest for the rest of bar 2. So playing those 2 bars, so the 2 flamacues, right lead flamacue and left lead flamacue, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and beneath the first bar, you've got MF, which is short for mezzo forte, so the dynamic you play it at is half loud. Okay, so for this piece, for this Latin piece, half loud is quite quiet. Okay, so remember, it's all relative to the style of music you're playing. So we want to keep it light, keep that nice kind of like finesse in your strokes, nice feel in the strokes. Okay, so we've got those 2 flamacues in the first 2 bars, and then in the next 2 bars, you can see we've got a 2-bar repeat there. So we're going to repeat bars 1 and 2, and then looking at line 2, the first 2 bars of line 2, so bars 5 and 6, we've got the same thing we've just played, but instead of the half note rest in the second bar, we've got a quarter note on the ride cymbal, and then a quarter note on ride and snare in unison. Okay, so for bars 5 and 6, you're playing 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so what we're going to try now is those first 6 bars, which is like the intro of the piece. Okay, so we just got that little repeated motif there, that motif. Okay, so we're going to try that now at the song tempo, 125 beats per minute. But obviously, make sure you get that down at a comfortable tempo for you. Get used to the orchestration of those rudiments, and then you want to lift the tempo, okay, to get to that goal tempo of 125 beats per minute. So let's see how that intro sounds at the song tempo. And now we'll try the intro, so those first 6 bars in time with a backing track. Okay, so we've got a 2-bar counting, so you'll hear 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're in. Okay, so make sure you come in at mezzo forte. You don't want to overpower the track, so remember we want to play nice and light for this Latin piece. Okay, and just make sure you've got a nice flow at that dynamic. Okay, it's sometimes harder to play at lower volumes, especially like rudimental type rhythms. Okay, so just make sure you're comfortable with the flow of this 2-bar motif at this dynamic. Okay, and also you want to make sure you hold that half note rest for the right duration, so you're restarting that 2-bar motif at the start of the 2-bar repeat at the right point. Okay, so just make sure you're good with the timing, you're feeling the tempo, you're feeling the music, and playing the notes that are in fitting with the style of music. Okay, so really listen to the track and just make sure your part is really fitting well with the music. Okay, so let's try first 6 bars, the intro, in time with the backing track. So now we come on to section A, which starts at bar 7. So you can see the rehearsal mark in there, the letter A in a box. And you can also see the sign above the rehearsal mark in there. So we know we're going to be coming back to this point later in the song. So just want to make a mental note of that. And you can also see at the start of bar 7, we've got a start repeat sign. So we know we're going to be repeating from this point as well. Okay, so in bar 7, we've got an 8th note rhythm on the ride bell. So we're just playing constant 8ths for the whole bar. So we've got 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and the lead hand on the ride bell. And we got a snare and bass drum rhythm as well. Okay, so the snare is playing the and of 2, so that offbeat, the upbeat of 2. The bass drum's playing the and of 3, so again an offbeat note on the upbeat of 3. And the snare drum's also playing the and of 4, so again an offbeat note on that upbeat of 4. So very typical of a Latin groove. We've got that ride bell sound and the offbeat sound of the bass and snare drum. Okay, so bar 7 sounds like this. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you want to get that bar down individually first of all, and then looking at bar 8, you can see first of all what we've got is we've got a tie coming off of that and of 4 of bar 7. That's tied to the downbeat of 1, that 8th note on the 1 in bar 8. So a tie merges those two notes together, so we don't actually play that 1 in bar 8, that downbeat of 1. So we're going to let it ring for that note, and then we're going to play that 8th note on the and of 1 on the ride bell. Okay, then on the downbeat of 2, we've got an 8th note on the ride bell and snare drum in unison, and then we've got a bass drum on its own on the and of 2, and then we've got ride bell and snare drum in unison on the downbeat of 3, bass drum on its own again on the and of 3, ride bell on its own on the downbeat of 4, and then we've got ride bell, snare drum and bass drum in unison on the and of 4, that upbeat. Okay, so we're going to play this bar now. So this bar's a bit different in that we haven't got that constant 8th note rhythm on the ride bell. Okay, so we're going to come in, remember that first note we play is on the and of 1. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so again, get that bar down individually first of all, and then we're going to put those two bars together. So we're going to play bars 7 and 8. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. So now looking at bar 9 at the start of the next line. So again, just to go back to that final note of bar 8, so we've got another tie coming off that note, which ties to the downbeat of 1 in bar 9. Okay, so remember that tie merges the notes together, so we don't actually play that note on the 1 of bar 9 because it's merged with the previous note on the and of 4 of bar 8. Okay, so we just let the ride bell ring for that downbeat of 1 in bar 9, and then we're coming on the 8th note on the ride bell on the and of 1. Then we've got high tom on its own on the downbeat of 2, ride bell and high tom in unison on the and of 2. Then we've got ride bell for a quarter note on 3, floor tom on its own on the downbeat of 4 for an 8th note, and then ride bell and floor tom in unison on the and of 4. Okay, so that bar we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, then looking at bar 10, so again, first note there is tied to the previous note on the and of 4 of bar 9. So we let the ride bell ring for the downbeat of 1 in bar 10, but we've got a bass drum on that note as well, which we do actually play. Okay, so that isn't tied to a note in the previous bar. So we play the bass drum on the 1 for an 8th note, and we just let the ride bell ring for that downbeat of 1. And then we've got ride bell on its own for an 8th note on the and of 1, ride bell on its own again for the downbeat of 2, ride bell and snare in unison on the and of 2, ride bell on its own on the downbeat of 3, ride bell and bass drum on the and of 3, then we've got ride bell and floor tom on the downbeat of 4, floor tom on its own on the upbeat of 4, that and of 4. Okay, so we've got 8th notes on the ride bell all the way to the downbeat of 4. So that bar sounds like this. Remember, don't play the ride bell on the 1, but do play the bass drum on the 1. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so putting those two bars together, bars 9 and 10, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, then the next bar, bar 11, so we got constant 8th notes on the ride bell for this bar, and then we got a bass drum on the 1, snare and bass drum on the and of 2, bass drum on the 3, snare drum on the and of 3, snare and bass drum on the and of 4. Okay, so we're going to play that bass and snare drum rhythm underneath those constant 8th notes on the ride bell. So bar 11 sounds like this, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, then the next bar, bar 12, we've got ride bell, snare and bass drum in unison for a quarter note on the 1, ride bell, snare and bass drum in unison for a quarter note on the 2. Then we've got 8th notes on the 3 on the high tom, so that'd be 3 and then we've got a 16th note on the kick on 4, 16th note on the floor tom on the E of 4, and then we've got an 8th note on the high tom for the and of 4. So that'd be 40 and. So we've got a 2-beat fill there. We've got 3 and 40 and. So that fill sounds like this. 1, 2. Okay, so playing that whole bar now, bar 12. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so put the 2 bars together to play bars 11 and 12. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. And then in the next bar, bar 13, at the start of the next line, we've got 8th notes on the ride bell again for the whole bar, but we've got a tie coming off of that 8th note on the and of 2, which is tied to the downbeat of 3, the 8th note on the downbeat of 3. So we play that note on the and of 2 and let it ring for that note on the downbeat of 3. So remember the tie merges those 2 notes together. Okay, we've got a bass and snare drum rhythm, so a bass drum playing on the 1, snare drum on the 2, bass drum on the and of 2, snare drum on the and of 4. Okay, so predominantly off beat again, but we have got a note that's on the beat there, that snare drum on the 2. Okay, so just don't get caught out by that. Make sure you hit that downbeat of 2 with the snare drum for this bar. Okay, so bar of 13 sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, in the next bar, bar 14, we got ride bell and snare drum in unison for an 8th note on the 1, bass drum for an 8th note on the and of 1, ride bell and snare drum for a quarter note on the downbeat of 2. Then we've got an 8th note rest on the 3, 8th note on the floor tom on the and of 3, and then snare drum for a quarter note on the 4. So that bar is 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, you can see we've got a end repeat sign at the end of bar 14 there. So this is the end of the repeated section. So remember we saw that start repeat sign at the start of bar 7, at the start of section A. And above bar 14, we've got those volta brackets with the number 1 in. So this is the first time bar. Okay, so this is the first ending of the repeated section. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to put bars 13 and 14 together. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you want to get these bars down individually just to get the rhythms down, and then you want to pair them up to play them as 2 bars. Okay, and then what we're going to do now is we're going to try it from the start repeat sign at the start of section A, so bar 7, and play through this repeated section with the first ending, okay, that first time bar. So it sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you want to get that flowing, make sure you're comfortable with all of those rhythms, and then obviously we hit that end repeat sign at the end of the first time bar, which takes us back to the start repeat sign at the start of section A at bar 7. We play through this section again, and then when we get to the end of bar 13, we skip past ending 1, the first time bar, and we play ending 2, the second time bar. Okay, so if you look at that bar, bar 15, we've got the same start that we had in bar 14, so we got those 8th notes, ride bell and snare drum in unison, and bass drum on the end of 1, and then we got that quarter note, ride bell and snare drum, and it's just the second 2 beats in the bar that change. So we got 8th note triplets for the 3 and 4, so that'd be 3 and 4 and the rudiment we're playing for those 8th note triplets is flam accents. So we got a right lead flam accent all on snare drums, so that'd be 3 and so right flam, left stroke, right stroke, and then we got a left lead flam accent. So left flam on the snare drum, right hand moves to the floor tom, and we got a left stroke on the snare drum. Okay, so that bar 15 sounds like this. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so let's try the repeated section now with the second time bar. So we got starting from bar 7. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you want to make sure you can flow through that section with both the first ending and second ending. And then at the end of the second time bar there, we can see we've got a double bar line, which means there's going to be a musical change. And that's because we come to the end of section A. So we're going to put the whole of section A together now. So playing through the repeated section with the first time bar and the second time bar at the song tempo, 125 beats per minute. And now we're going to try section A in time with a backing track. Okay, so this is a tricky part to play because there isn't much consistency in the groove. Okay, there's changes in each of the bar. Okay, so you want to make sure you're sight reading, but you're not putting all your energy into sight reading. Okay, to the point where there's no feel in the notes. So make sure you're still portraying the feel of the music as you play the notes, and just make sure when you're sight reading, you're just kind of glancing at the music just to help you with the placement of the notes. Obviously, the more you play it, the more you get to know the placement of the notes, and the less you'll have to kind of look at the music and really sight read it. Okay, so just make sure you've got that balance of putting the feel into the notes as well, and you aren't just reading notes and playing notes. You want to be playing music. Okay, so if you feel like there's too much focus on reading the notes, just get to know the notes more, play through the bars individually, play through them in 2 bars, and then you'll kind of get an idea of the flow of the notes, and then like I said, you won't need to put too much energy into the reading, and you can put more energy into the playing. Okay, so just make sure you get to that point before you play it with the music, because you want the notes to complement the music. So you want to make sure you feel comfortable when you play these notes. If you feel comfortable, the notes are going to sound better. Okay, so get to that point first of all. Don't rush to be able to play it with the music, but when you're there, let's hear how the section A sounds with the backing track. So now we come on to section B, which starts at bar 16. So you can see the rehearsal marking the letter B in a box there. Okay, now in this section we move on to the ride cymbal. Okay, so we're going to hit the face of the cymbal rather than the ride bell. Okay, so looking at bar 16, we've got downbeats on the ride cymbal. So we're playing 1, 2, 3, 4 on the ride, and we've got bass and snare underneath that. So we've got a bass on the 1 for a quarter note, snare on the 2 for a quarter note, bass drum for an eighth note on the 3, and then we've got a bass drum on its own on the and of 3, and a snare drum for a quarter note on the 4. Okay, so that groove in bar 16 sounds like this. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, then in the next bar, we've got a kick for an eighth note on the 1, and then we've got toms in unison. So high tom and floor tom in unison for the and of 1, and also the downbeat of 2 for an eighth note. Okay, then we play a bass drum on its own on the end of 2. Toms in unison again on a downbeat of 3. Another bass drum on its own. Then we've got a snare on its own for an eighth note on the 4. And then ride and bass drum in unison on the and of 4. Okay, so we've got constant eighth notes throughout this bar. It sounds like this. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so putting those 2 bars together, bars 16 and 17, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, then coming into the next bar, which is bar 18, we've got a ride cymbal on its own for an eighth note on the 1, and we've got ride and bass drum in unison for an eighth note on the end of 1, ride and snare drum for a quarter note on 2, ride on its own for the downbeat of 3 for an eighth note, ride and bass on the end of 3 for an eighth note, and then ride and bass drum on the 4 for a quarter note. So the rhythm is 1 and 2, 3 and 4. So we got this 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and in the next bar we've got a 1 bar fill, so bar 19. So we've got eighth notes on the 1 and the 2. So we've got 1 and 2 and the rudiment we're playing for those two beats are flam taps. So we've got right hand on high tom, left hand on the snare drum. We're going to play a right lead flam tap first of all. So the left will play a grace note on the snare drum, right will play a primary note on the high tom. So we've got flam, and a right stroke on the high tom. And then we keep our hands on the same two drums, and we're just going to switch up to play a left lead flam tap. Okay, so now the right plays the grace note on the high tom, left plays the primary note on the snare drum, and then we've got that left stroke on the snare. So we've got a left flam tap. So we've got right then left for beats 1 and 2. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and on the third beat we've got eighth notes again, and this time we're just alternating flam. So the two drums we're going to play on this time are snare and floor tom. So left hand on snare, right hand on floor tom. We're going to play a right flam first of all. So left plays the grace note on the snare that drops in just before the primary note on the floor tom, and then we're going to switch up. So keep our hands on the same drums, but we're going to play a left flam. Okay, so we'll play right grace note on floor tom, left stroke on snare. So you've got right flam, left flam. So that'd be 3 and on the fourth beat we've got a 16th note on the bass drum, 16th note on the E on the floor tom, and then we've got 2 snare drums on the and the which would be left left. So we've got 4 E and a. Okay, so we'll play the beats 3 and 4. We got 1, 2. Okay, so putting the whole bar together, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you want to make sure you're okay with that bar. So isolate it, play it a comfortable rhythm, and then build it up so you get that flow with the rudiments in that bar. So we'll put the two bars together. So bars 18 and 19, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, we're on to the next line. We've got right cymbals on the downbeats again, so 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got a bass on the 1, snare on 2, snare on 3, bass on its own on the end of 3, snare on 4, bass on its own on the end of 4. So bar 20 sounds like this: 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, then we come into bar 21. We've got an eighth note rest on the downbeat of 1, and then we've got a double stroke for 2 16th notes on the high tom. So that would be and a. And then we've got a paradiddle on beat 2 for 16th notes. So that'd be 2 E and a. So we've got left on snare drum, right on floor tom, left on snare drum. Okay, so that's a left lead paradiddle. So we've got a right double stroke on high tom, left paradiddle between snare and floor tom. So those two beats, so again we're coming on the and of 1. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and then we finish that bar with more groove. So for the beats 3 and 4, we got ride cymbal and bass drum in unison on the downbeat of 3, bass on its own on the end of 3 for an eighth note, ride and snare drum in unison on the downbeat of 4, ride and bass drum on the end of 4. Okay, so that whole bar, bar 21, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so again, get that down individually on its own, and then we'll play bars 20 and 21. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and in the next bar, we've got eighth notes on the 1, the 2, and the 3. So that's 1 and 2 and 3, and then a quarter note on the 4. We've got ride on a downbeat of 1, high tom on the end of 1, ride on a downbeat of 2, floor tom on the end of 2, ride on a downbeat of 3, a bass drum on the end of 3, and then we've got ride and snare drum in unison for a quarter note on the 4. Okay, so with the left hand, you're going from high to low. So high tom, floor tom, bass drum. so on those upbeats. So that bar 22, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Then in the next bar 23, ride and bass drum in unison for a quarter note and a downbeat of 1. Then we've got eighth note triplets on the 2, so that'd be 2 and a, and we rest on the downbeat. So we rest on the 2 and we play the and a on the snare drum, and we've got a quarter note on the 3 on the snare drum, quarter note rest on 4. So that rhythm is 1 and a 3. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you can play those snare drum notes right, left, right. So we're going to put those 2 bars together, bars 22 and 23. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so what we're going to try that whole line, and just to make sure we can flow from through those 4 bars. Okay, so you want to link those 4 bars up. So let's try bars 20, 21, 22 and 23. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so just to make sure you've got that flow from bars 21 to 22, okay, coming out of bar 21 and going straight into that flow around the kit on bar 22. Okay, so you want to get that down, and then you can see we've got double bar line at the end of bar 23, so that brings us to the end of section B. Okay, so we're going to put the whole of section B together now. So we've got a ride cymbal groove now instead of the ride bell. So on the ride cymbal, and we've got those rudimental fills. Okay, so again, you just want to make sure you can flow through this section. So work at a comfortable tempo for you, and then bump it up to that song tempo. So let's hear our section B sounds at song tempo 125 beats per minute. And now we'll try section B in time with the backing track. Okay, so just like before, just make sure you're playing the notes in fitting with the music. Okay, so keep it nice and light. Okay, make sure you're complementing the feel of the music. Make sure everything's in time, and you've got a nice flow to your rudimental fills. Okay, so let's try section B in time with the backing track. Now at the end of section B, you can see above the end of bar 23, it says DS al coda, which is short for del segno al coda, which means go back to the sign and play till we see to coda. Okay, so we saw the signs. We took a mental note earlier that we saw it at the start of section A, so start at bar 7. So we go back to the sign at bar 7 and we play through until we see to coda. So we play bar 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 and 12. And at the end of bar 12, we can see it says to coda. Okay, so after bar 12, we jump to the coda. So remember, coda is short for tail, which means the end of the piece. So the coda at the end of the piece there. So let's look at that now. Starting at bar 24. So in bar 24, we've got eighth notes on the ride cymbal. And we got ties coming off the eighth note on the and of 2, which is tied to a downbeat of 3. And another tie on the and of 3, which is tied to a downbeat of 4. So remember that the tie merges the notes together. So we don't play the note at the end of a tie because it's merged with the note at the start of the tie. So the notes we'll actually play are the 1 and 2 and. Okay, letting the note ring on a downbeat of 3 and 4. Okay, in the bass and snare drum rhythm we've got underneath that, we've got a bass on the 1, snare on 2, bass on the and of 2, bass on the and of 3, snare on the and of 4. So bar 24 sounds like this. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so just like we had earlier in bar 13, we got that snare drum on the downbeat of 2 there. Okay, so just make sure you aren't caught out by playing on the offbeat there. So make sure you hit that downbeat of 2 on the snare. And then in bar 25, we've got eighth notes on the 1, so that'd be 1 and we've got a quarter note on 2, so that'd be 1 and 2. We've got high tom, snare drum and bass drum in unison on the 1, snare drum on its own on the and of 1, and then hi tom, snare drum and bass drum in unison on the 2. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4. And we've got an 8th note rest on the downbeat of 3, bass drum on the and of 3, and then floor tom for a quarter note on the 4. Okay, so putting the whole bar together, bar 25, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so we put those 2 bars together, bars 24 and 25. We got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you want to make sure you can play those 2 bars, and then we've got a double bar line at the end of bar 25, which means there's a musical change. And you can see in the next 2 bars, so bars 26 and 27, we've got that same 2 bar motive that you played at the start of the piece. Okay, so those flammacues. So you're back to playing the flammacues there in those 2 bars, and in bars 28 and 29, you've got a 2 bar repeat, so we play the flammacue motif again. And then in the final 2 bars of the piece, so bars 30 and 31, we've got the 2 bar flammacues again. Okay, so we finish in much the same way we started, but instead of completing that 3rd and 4th beat like we did at the end of the intro, we just leave it with that half note rest to finish the piece. Okay, so we just finish with that motif. So we're going to play through the last part of the song now. So we go from the sign at the start of section A, we play through until we see to coda at the end of bar 12, and then we play the coda. Okay, so let's put all that together now at the song tempo, 125 beats per minute. And now we'll try from the sign to the end of the piece in time with a backing track. So that's all of the sections. You want to work on each section individually, play them at a comfortable tempo for you, and as you get comfortable with the parts and you're starting to put more feel into the notes and it's starting to sound more musical, you want to bring the tempo up until you hit that song tempo, 125 beats per minute. Once you got to that point, what you want to do is you want to work on the transitions from section to section. Okay, so you want to go from the intro into section A, so practice that transition, and then from section A into section B, so making sure when you work on that transition, you're changing from the ride bell in section A to the ride cymbal, so the face of the cymbal in section B. Okay, then work on the transition from section B into the final part of the song, which is from the sign. So obviously you're going from that ride cymbal part in section B, then you're going back to the sign, which is the start of section A, where you're back to the ride bell. Okay, then obviously when you get sent to the coda at the end of bar 12 and you play the coda, we're going back to the ride cymbal again. Okay, so just make sure you're comfortable with all of those transitions. So transitioning from the parts, so rhythmically, and also like in terms of orchestration, so where you're playing the parts. Okay, just get really familiar with the transitions of the parts. Once you're comfortable with the transitions, then you want to put the whole piece together. Okay, make sure you can flow through the whole piece. All right, so let's hear how that sounds now. The whole piece at the song tempo, 125 beats per minute. And then finally, we're going to play the whole piece in time with a backing track. Okay, so just to reiterate, this is a Latin piece. You want to make sure you're playing the notes nice and light. Okay, so you want to make sure you're playing the notes in fitting with the music, and also you want to make sure you're not just playing the notes. Okay, we don't just want to be sight reading and playing the notes in the right places. We want to be putting our feel into the notes. Okay, so make sure you're playing music. Make sure you're feeling comfortable with the notes. Okay, if you're feeling comfortable, the notes are going to sound better, and that's when the music will start to sound and feel good. Okay, so develop yourself as a musician. You don't just want to be playing notes to get through the piece and to achieve the grade. Okay, make sure you're learning the piece, learning the style of music, and you're able to play the style of music. Okay, so that's the important thing. It's developing you as a musician, so you sound good, which will mean other musicians want to play with you because you make the music sound and feel good. Okay, that's what we want to develop, that communication of the music to the listener. Okay, if you can communicate the music with the right feel, that's going to have the right effect on the listener, and they're going to want to listen to music that you produce. Okay, that's the goal. It's not the bit of paper that says you're a particular grade because you can play a piece. Okay, so really have that in mind when you're working on this piece. Make sure you're playing it in a Latin style and it feels good and sounds good. Okay, so once you're at that point, you want to put the whole song together in time with the backing track. Okay, and we want to be playing it as we're playing it. We actually want to be enjoying it. We don't just want to be reading through the notes and rigidly playing the notes. We want to just be sight reading and glancing at the notes to help us map our way through the piece, but we're putting loads of feel into the notes that we're playing. So it feels good, sounds good, okay, and we're enjoying playing it. Okay, so let's get to that point first, and now let's hear how the song sounds in time with a backing track.